My name's Jacqueline Wilson and I write children's books. Maybe you even read one when you were young, and I'm here to discuss my life in objects. The first object is this extremely tattered school book. It's a story I wrote when I was 9. I knew right from when I was even much younger that I wanted to be a writer, and so this was I called it a novel, but it's only about, I would say, 12, 14 pages at the most. But it's rather weird. It's about a poor family with problems. And some of these characters are pretty similar to the sort of children I've written about throughout my professional career. I always wanted to write about families. I wanted to write from a child's point of view, but I was a little bit scathing about the sort of stories I was reading in the 1950s, early 1960s. Children's books were very middle class then, and mums and dads always got on well together, and the children never had any real arguments or any kind of problems. Whereas while I was reading them, I used to think, yeah, this is a gripping story, but it's not like my life, it's not like my friend's life. And I always used to think that if I ever wrote children's books, I would want to try and write it truthfully about how mean children can be and how worrying it can be as a child, and yet also the fun you can have as a child too. When Alfred Maggott was married, he stated he wanted children, and children he got. You see, Daisy Maggott wanted children too, and everything Daisy wanted she was sure to get. The Maggotts had 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. The eldest, Marilyn, is dead keen on boys. It's a wonder the teacher didn't put colloquial there. Boys are dead keen on her too. Then comes Marlene, the brainy one. She is 12 and has passed the scholarship to the high school. Her interest is books. You can't drag her out of them. It makes me wince now, but I am pleased that I have this relic of my writing childhood. So that's number 1 object. I've had a wonderful artistic partnership with Nick Sharratt over the years. We first got together for the story of Tracy Beaker, and which was surprisingly successful. Neither of us necessarily thought it would be. And a year or 2 after publication, Nick gave me this strange object, which is a Tracy Beaker stamp. I had started to get quite a lot of children writing to me, and so instead of, I used to try and copy Nick's illustrations and draw a Tracy for them, but if I had heaps of letters to answer, to save time, I could do a Tracy stamp, or I could stamp it on the envelope. And Nick specially designed it for me. I think he must have one, but otherwise it's just the only other one. And I'm very proud of my Tracy stamp, and to be truthful, I haven't used it for a while, but actually looking for it and actually finding it, I'm so pleased that any child in future that gets a letter from me, don't be surprised if there is a Tracy stamp on the back. I've written 3 Tracy Beaker books when Tracy's a little girl, and I think Tracy has to be my most popular character. And for many years, whenever I've given talks about my books and I've mentioned Tracy, I have had a little joke saying, well, maybe it's time to find out what Tracy's like now she's grown up, and I wonder what sort of mum would she be. And I've sort of had a bit of fun with this, but never really taking it seriously. But then, I don't know, last year I suddenly thought, well, why don't I write about Tracy as a mum, but from her daughter's point of view? So my mum, Tracy Beaker, is supposedly written by Jess Beaker, who's about the age that Tracy was when I first started writing about her. And Tracy, I think, is a fantastic mum. And the relationship between Tracy and Jess and makes me feel very, very happy for them. But it's not a sweetness and light book all the way through, but Tracy and Jess are my two Beakers now, and I'm very, very fond of them. I happen to wear an awful lot of silver jewellery. It's the one way children can make sure it's me if they see me in the street. In fact, my daughter said when she was little, it was always so useful because she didn't even have to spot me if we were in a department store. She just listened for the clanking. She knew that's my mum. I love jewellery. I treated myself to a ring, the very first book that got published, and I've carried on ever since. These are some of my favourites. I used to wear a ring on every finger, which must have looked really alarming. Have calmed down a little bit now. I love this one. It's rose quartz, and it's got all sorts of decorations on the side. And this one is a lovely opal with dragonflies either side of it. And this one is a little frog. It's appropriate because these are all great frog jewellery, which I now buy in a lovely shop in Brighton. More bangles, another bangle here, and a sort of blue moonstone there. So I always wear jewellery, even if I'm, I don't know, going around the local supermarket, or I've even been known to be stupid enough to wear jewellery doing a bit of weeding in the garden. I don't feel myself unless I'm wearing it. I think my favourite piece of jewellery is the rose quartz ring, which I wear all the time, but I get very fond of all of them, and I have a sort of big jewellery box of all these different silver rings, and so occasionally I have a little sort of rumble around in them and find something that I haven't worn for ages and try wearing that. I'm trying to sort of stop buying quite so many now and just enjoy the ones I've got. I'm very fond of silver, obviously, and I'm particularly fond of this little silver pillbox, which has got a sort of crescent moon and a hare in the countryside. It was a very special present given to me by my daughter, Emma, and it makes me happy each time I bring the pillbox out, because I've had sort of various boring things wrong with me, and I now need pills to keep myself going, and so out comes the pillbox and have the appropriate pills. So that's a nice way of coping with, you know, popping down all these pills like Smarties. I said my daughter's called Emma. It's a sneaky way of getting in another object. I love reading. One of my very favourite books is Jane Austen's Emma, as you can tell from sort of how tatty it is. And I like it, even though Emma is a bit of a busybody in Jane Austen. My Emma is perfect in every way. I have to say this because I'm her mum. When Emma was little, I would occasionally read my books to her, and she was always very game, and she always said she liked them, but I don't think they were really her cup of tea at all when she was little, because she didn't like books with any kind of conflict, and my books are full of conflict and sad things happening. Now she's an adult, she's still incredibly tactful and generally remembers when I've got a book out and says, oh, let me have a look at it. And she will say lovely things about it, because I think she's the only person in my life that actually understands that if I say, tell me what you really think of it, what I actually mean is, please tell me it's okay. Don't point out any faults. Lots of other people will be able to do that, but not anybody I really care about. Now, I am not a sporty sort of person. I mean, when we had games at school, I always hated it. For a long, long time in my adult life, on a Friday morning, as soon as I woke up, I would listen hopefully for rain, because if it was pouring with rain, we didn't have double hockey at school, which was my worst thing ever. We had country dancing instead, which was fun. I like dancing. But the only sporty thing I do enjoy is swimming. I find swimming enormously relaxing, and on and off throughout my life, I've always tried to be near a pool so I can go and have a swim. I used to belong to an early risers club and flash up and down the pool with a whole load of other people who became great friends. Now I'm not so much a leaping out of bed at 6 o'clock person, but I do adore it, particularly in the summer, because there's an outdoor pool, a little one, that I can swim in, so that when I say I've done 100 lengths this morning, it sounds so impressive. And I always wear goggles. And it's strange because they're not these very posh goggles that are prescription, so I can't really see when I'm wearing the goggles, but it keeps me sort of, I suppose, using a ridiculous term, in the zone. I just think my own thoughts. I'm not really aware of what's around me. It certainly keeps me fit, and I think that's the main thing. This is a very special tea cosy. She's got a lovely china top and a knitted skirt. And sadly, she's not the exact tea cosy that my grandma had, but she's as near as I can find as a replica. When I was growing up, my grandma was my favourite relative, and I used to go to tea with her every week. Now, though she was quite a good cook, she didn't bake, but she went to a wonderful cake shop in Surbiton, which had lots and lots of dolls in the windows, special displays, and she would choose a different favourite cake for me. And I have such fond memories of drinking a cup of tea, which I thought very grown up at 7 or 8, and eating the cake. And then she allowed me to play with her China lady, as I called her. And I played, you know, she was going to the ball with her lovely, swishy, knitted outfit. She bears a slight resemblance to those ladies that genteel people had to go over their lavatory rolls. But this one, I think, is definitely a teapot lady, and she has the little sort of holes in her knitted dress so for the handle and the spout. I've never actually used her on a teapot, but I do keep up the tradition of having an afternoon cup of tea, and often it's with a slice of cake too. When I was little and desperate to be a writer, when I used to walk to school, I would actually sort of have a little fantasy interview in my head about somebody asking me, you know, how do you feel, Jacqueline, having written all these books? But it was simply that, a fantasy. And in a way, even though I've written over 100 books now, it still in some ways feels as if it's just my imaginary game as a child. I am still taken by surprise in some ways when people recognize me and say they like my books. It's just a wonderful thing for me, because mostly when people have ambitions when they're really young, you don't actually get to achieve your childhood dreams, but I just feel so lucky that I have.